Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the SMSL DO100 Pro. This is a 220 US dollar digital to analog converter. This was sent to me from Aoshida Audio. Aoshida has not asked nothing in return other than a fair and honest evaluation and for an affiliate link. So the links where you can buy this product down in the description below will be affiliate links. So if you like what I have to say about it and you're interested in buying it, please consider using those affiliate links and I will get a small kickback. And I use affiliate link money to just keep the channel going. This enters in as another of the under 250 US dollar kind of budget enthusiast starter DACs that are on the market right now. How does it stack up? Stick around after shameless self-promotion to find out.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style, and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
The DO100 Pro again checks in right at about 220 US dollars. It is a fully balanced digital to analog converter built around an ESS ES9039 Q2M DAC chip. It has an XMOS XU316 USB implementation. It supports a whole bunch of formats out there. Like it's got Bluetooth 5.1 on it. It will decode PCM files up to 32-bit 768 kilohertz sampling rates. It will do up to DSD 512, and it will even fully decode MQA if that is still of interest to you. There is a remote control. Yes, the RC8C, which is fairly standard issue SMSL remote control anymore. It comes with this unit and all of that. So that is a lot of features and a lot of specs for 220 US dollars. Does it sound as good as, say, the shit Modius E, which I recently called like the reference at this kind of price point, because this is about 230 US dollars, so pretty much the same price. And real quick, this is a fine sounding unit. It is a very good sounding unit. I would say it's just one half step below the quality of what you get from the Modius E or something of that nature. So it's not quite reference caliber sound, though it is still very good sound. And the feature set really is killer for the price. Like, it has a lot of excellent features. So I think it's going to be a relatively popular unit. A lot of people, particularly international customers, are going to be interested in this one because shit products, for example, are really hard to get when you're not in the United States and often come with some increase in price and all that if you are international. So I think the DO100 Pro does ably step into the market and fill a void there, and it's a pretty solid unit overall. So let's explore why I say these things. All right, I've already talked about some of the specs and the features on it, so let's do a quick unit tour. Front panel, you get a nice big display right here. That's just an LED display. It is dimmable, I believe, if you don't like it. You have a multi-function button and knob right here that can help you navigate the menu. It also is a volume knob because this thing is not only a DAC, it does have a variable output and can function as a preamp. Rather small footprint. It has like, is this plastic or is it metal? Hard to tell, honestly. It's not like a brick or anything, but it is decently well made. The front panel is plastic. The back panel, we have the standard balanced 3-pin XLR analog audio outputs, and then in between them, SMSL likes to do this arrangement here with the balanced outputs here and then the single-ended output between them. Then over here, you see the input options. You get 2 flavors of SPDIF input in a Toast-Link fiber optic and then an RCA coaxial. There is an HDMI port on it which accepts the audio return channel from your television. So it's HDMI ARC. It is not an I2S input on there. And that's becoming more and more common on DACs that I'm seeing here. Manufacturers seem to be making DACs more like television and video friendly. Honestly, I think they are realizing that a lot of people are using hi-fi gear to handle the sound duties on TV shows, movies, and that sort of thing. And they're trying to make it easier and easier to integrate that in. So that's here for those who like it. Then there is a USB input. It is a USB-C input in there, and that also is becoming much more common. In fact, I was saying on my Discord recently that I have gotten a bunch of DACs in relatively recently. This one, I just reviewed the Ferrum Vondla. What else is in there? I have the Black Ice Audio Aries all-in-one unit in right now. And there's been a couple of others I want to say. Anyway, a string of gear recently that where the USB input has gone to USB-C. So that seems to be becoming more and more popular. But again, simple unit, decently made. The display on it is nice and big, and you can read it across the room. It's got a remote control and all of that. So, I mean, the feature set on it is pretty solid, and honestly, it's one of the most robust feature sets out there on the market right now for a DAC that's under this $250 price point. So that's got a lot going for it right there. But how does it sound, right? Let's get into that. To test this piece here, I used direct USB connection to my Microsoft Surface Pro 4 laptop, which was using SMSL's ASIO driver that you can download from their website that matches this product here. That would have the Surface would have been a Rune endpoint, and all files that I listened to would have been lossless or high-res FLAC files, either stored locally or streamed from Qobuz, or I had some local DSD files as well, all of those through Rune. I also checked this device on my desk using a Sonor Ultra Rendu streamer, and then routing that through a Singer SU6 DDC, and then a coaxial connection to the coaxial input of this to hear how it would function there. All right. Downstream from this, headphone amps used. A good chunk of the time it was plugged into my Lake People G111 Mark II. I took this DAC out to my sunroom as it's finally spring where I live, and it's nice to sit out there. So I took this, the G111 Mark II, hooked those up together, and then my Focal Radiance, and listened to that setup with using my Surface Pro 4 as the source there at USB. Did a lot of listening out there while watching the birds and all of that sort of thing and enjoying the nice weather. Then I also brought it down to my desk system here where the amplifiers that would have been fed into would have been a Hi-Fi Golden Wave Prelude. And then I also have, it is right here, the headphone version 2 is in, and I used that to evaluate this piece of gear as well. All right, what did I learn through all of that? The sound signature on this, if you're familiar with SMSL products, is exactly what you would expect. The best term that I can give you for that is like Chi-Fi neutral, right? These Chi-Fi or Chinese-made DACs like this, they tout themselves as being neutral and not having a sound, but like that's not true of any piece of audio gear ever. They all have a sound. SMSLs tend to be very neutral in their frequency response, but there is a presentation and a way about them that is very similar across their units. Like my old SU8 had it, like the DO100 Pro had it, like the DO100EX all-in-one unit that I've reviewed and all of that. They all just had a very similar sound where they are clean, they are clear, they are mostly neutral in their frequency response. They may not have really great sub-bass extension, but it's okay. Okay, and all of that made it in here too. The other presentational aspects of it, like the sound stage is like not huge, it is not small, it is just kind of there. The imaging and the spatial presentation, like the separation and the layering and all of that within it is solid. It's not quite three-dimensional. I mean, it's a $220 unit. So expectations on spatial holography need to be tempered accordingly, but it's still pretty solid in there. There's a good sense of where our sound's coming from. There's a decent sense of like there being space in between sounds and all of that too. The dynamics, and in this term, and in this aspect, like I mean the pacing and like the physicality and the impact and like the perceived speediness of the sound and all of that is about average, I would say. It really does not stand out as being overly impactful or withdrawn or laid back. in that category either. The resolution is price appropriate, like the detail retrieval and all of that happens here at $220 is solid. It is not necessarily state of the art for that price. It is far from poor. It does a good job of resolving things like room reverbs and the zizzy sound of bows being dragged across strings and all of that stuff. Like, it is all around really solid. It's not standout, it's not flashy or anything like that. It's just very competent, very cool. Like, and I don't mean cool in terms of like a frequency response thing. It keeps its cool. And it's, it strikes a nice balance of being laid back, but also not aggressive, not particularly fatiguing. I did not really have a whole lot of problem with sibilance on this device either. These cheaper units with the ESS chips in them have a reputation for having a digital glare up top, and I really did not notice that a whole lot. So I think SMSL is improving in their implementation of ESS chips well, as they're keeping some of that treble sharpness under control. I'm not saying that you're not ever going to hear it on this unit. I just personally didn't really notice it being much of a problem. All right, so again, the sound on this thing, it kind of, again, just plays everything right down the middle. Competent to good. Doesn't really stand out, reach out and grab you in either way, but nor is it insufficient or like lacking in any meaningful area or anything like that. So again, just very clean, clear, well-rounded, competent kind of sound on it, which at this price I think is appropriate. Now, let's dig into some of the finer details on like what input should you use and why, and like the balanced versus single-ended output performance, and then we'll do a comparison with the Modius E here. All right, I did notice that the direct USB input on this using the XMOS XU316 implementation was decent. I didn't think it was great. Like, we'll talk a little bit more when we get to like the Modius E comparison with Shit's Unison USB there. The USB implementation on the DO100 Pro is just okay. Not terrible. It handles noisy signals okay, like system noise and all of that, but not great. It's just a little bit soft, a little bit laid back in comparison to like the Modius E, for example. And when you give it a high quality like US or SPDIF source. Like, I don't expect the unit to sound as good from its own USB input as it does using the combination of my Sonar Ultra Rendu streamer and the Singer SU6 DDC, and then a coaxial connection into the DO100 Pro. And it didn't, but the gap was quite large. And I think it's at this point where I like to defend this point a little more. I do want to talk a little bit about the Modius E and bring that in here as well, because the Unison USB implementation on the Modius E, again, I have a review for this out quite recently. See link in the description if you want to watch that. The Unison USB input on this thing, also a USB-C, is very good. Right, it does one of the best jobs at the price point of like filtering out system noise and still producing high quality audio and all of that. When I compared these two sonically at my desk, routing both of them through the Prelude amplifier, which is a $2,500 US, like really excellent headphone amp, and then using the Headphone 2, and spoiler alert, I like the Headphone 2 a lot. It's very, very good. Review of that coming up soon, but that's why I was comfortable using it as a reference to compare these two in here. Using the twin coaxial outputs on the Singer SU6 and routing them through here, and then also just using like a phone charging power brick kind of power supply for the Modius E here with a generic USB-C cable for power, using identical AudioQuest Forest USB cables for signal for both of these here. I thought the Modius E slightly outperformed the SMSL here. Just direct comparison, coax in to coax in, both routed through the SU6. Again, and all of that. They were very close to each other. Modius E, just slightly more holographic in its spatial presentation, fleshing out left, center, and left, right just a little bit more. Resolution and detail retrieval, I think, was very close to dead even on that. And then the Modius E also just has a little bit more impact to it, a little bit more energy and like, you know, just physicality to the sound that is part of shit's house sound that the SMSL doesn't have, you know, by choice, and that's fine there. But they were very, very close to each other is the point here, like very close. Switching a USB to USB, direct comparison there. And what I used is just a USB hub and then those two AudioQuest Forest USB cables from my Surface Pro 4 laptop into either of these, using the SMSL ASIO driver for the DO100 Pro, and then just the Wasapi plug-and-play driver that the Unison USB uses. And then putting both of them in the same maroon zone so I could flip back and forth really quick. What I noticed is that the gap widened between the two. The Modius E, the holography, the spatial holography of it stood out and took another half step forward beyond what the SMSL is capable of on there from the USB. The resolution there was actually a resolution difference where the Modius E started to resolve a few extra little tiny details that the DO100 Pro was not doing, and all of that. And then also just the punchiness and the impactfulness of the Modius E stood out just a little bit more in contrast to what the DO100 was doing there, again, direct USB to USB. Okay. So what that tells me is that the DAC implementations on both of these devices here are very, very close to equal. The performance on their ceiling on their performance, I should say, is very close to each other. I would still put the Modius E just slightly ahead of the DO100 Pro sonically, but it's a very small gap. But USB to USB, like the Modius E USB implementation is a little bit superior over the DO100 Pro. The DO100 Pro is, again, not bad. It does not sound bad. It's just not quite as good as what the Modius E is doing. And like, I want to come back to that spatial holography thing for just a moment. And that's just like the shape of the soundstage and the imaging from the DO100 Pro was unusual in compared to the Modius E. The Modius E was nice and coherent, left to right, placing everything well in there, like left, center, left, right, were fleshed out and nicely filled in. The soundstage size between the units here, the DO100 Pro and the Modius E, seem to be really close to the same, actually. The absolute width of the soundstage from the DO100 Pro sounded like it was almost, maybe just as wide as what the Modius E was giving me. But it kind of pushed everything a little bit more towards the centers, whereas just like if you could look at a heat map, so to speak, it would kind of look like a person's eye in that you would have most of the information close to the center, and then it would kind of trail off a little bit as you go to either direction, left or right. And so it doesn't sound quite as coherent when you pan left to right as the Modius E does. So it was just, that was more noticeable USB to USB comparison than it was coax to coax in there. So that's just something that I noticed and something to keep in mind. We need to talk about balance versus single-ended. So what I did to test this one, and I forgot to mention this in test gear, is I ran the single-ended outputs of both of these units into two of the three inputs on the Black Ice Audio Aries, which I already mentioned, just two of its analog inputs, because that's a single-ended only device. Volume matched everything as best I could, all of that. And what I noticed there is that the Modius E outperformed the DO100 Pro. Again, not by a lot, but by a little bit. And because I already had done a direct comparison of the balanced to single-ended outputs of the Modius E, that again told me that there is a gap, as there almost always is, in quality between the balanced and the single-ended outputs of these balanced DACs. And I will reiterate, balanced is not inherently better. Okay? If you design a DAC that is balanced from the ground up, and then you design one that is single-ended from the ground up, theoretically, the single-ended one should sound better because it requires fewer parts to do that design, which means at a fixed price point, better parts, which in theory means better performance. Okay. These designs that are balanced, though, and then they have a single-ended output on them. They're doing some kind of circuit conjiggering to go from that balanced design to the single-ended output, and that has negative impacts on the sound quality. So I don't recommend this DAC if the primary use is going to be for single-ended output. If you need it to like drive subwoofers or something like that, that's probably fine, okay? But as just a device to be a single-ended DAC, I would look elsewhere around that price. Okay, now let's come back to wrapping this up. Overall, I was pretty pleased with the DO100 Pro. It is just a little tiny bit behind off the reference pace of the Modius E in terms of sound quality here at around 220, just call it under 250 US dollars. Okay, very close. The feature set on it though makes the Modius E look bad. It's got a wider variety of decoding options. It's got different input connections that the Modius E doesn't have. It's got Bluetooth. It has a remote control. Okay. And it has variable output, so it can function as a preamp and all of that too. Okay, and the international availability of this unit is going to far outclass what the Modius E can do too. So do I recommend the DO100 Pro? Yeah, I do. I think it's a pretty solid sounding, again, kind of playing everything right down the middle. Just sounding clean, clear, generally competent, and like very good, but just not particularly great, nor particularly lacking at any one thing. And that's just fine, okay? That's a perfectly acceptable way to approach this because it will allow it to apply to a lot of use cases and make a lot of people who are just breaking into this hobby and exploring these kinds of things. And for them, spending $220 is a lot, okay? It will make them happy and give them a very robust and helpful feature set to go with it. So yes, I can recommend the DO100 Pro. All right, I am Wave Theory. Thanks for watching my review of the SMSL DO100 Pro digital to analog converter. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. If you haven't done that, check out my PayPal and my Patreon, and generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels. So thanks again for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.